2 months ago, after my last collection video update, I put away this watch in the closet in its original box. I was feeling like I had too many watches. Maybe I didn't need this watch. Maybe I could just wear my Submariner date 11610 and my Explorer 36mm 124270, and maybe they could do everything that the Speedmaster could do. So it sat out of my sight and out of my thoughts for about 6 weeks. Then in the last 2 weeks, something started pulling me back into it, making me want to unbox it and get it back on the wrist. Maybe it's the simplicity of the Speedmaster Professional, maybe the legibility, the carefree nature of it. But how could a watch with 3 subdials and 2 chronograph pushers be simple? That's the paradox of this watch, and Omega somehow pulls it off. It's deceptively simple and surprisingly legible. There's a delicate balance between designing a clean watch, but one that still holds visual interest. There's no hints of color here, just steel, black, and off-white markings, and very subtle textures of the dial and subdial. And the retro plasticky domed crystal gives you that nice distortion of the dial as you turn your wrist into parallel position. The current Hesselite version is even more subdued, with a printed logo, not applied, and an all-brush bracelet and a closed case back. Same with that fixed aluminum bezel. It seems virtually unchanged for the last 6 decades. The hands and hour markers are just thick enough to be legible, but thin enough to retain a vintage character. But for this case being a 42mm diameter, the most pleasantly surprising feature is how well it can wear on my small wrist and my very skinny forearms. I'll go over the 4 things that make this 42mm watch so easy to wear on a small wrist. Number 1, the lug-to-lug length. Number 2, the case thickness. Number 3, the rapid bracelet taper. And number 4, the bezel diameter. The twisted lyre lugs and the relatively short lug-to-lug distance is the first thing that makes the Speedmaster wear smaller than a typical Rolex 42mm. It takes up less of my wristband, but at the same time it gives a rounder, squatter appearance to the case. And the bracelet end links don't extend the watch band either. Folding them down, they can lie flush against the lugs. The case is respectively thin and lays flat on the wrist, and it actually looks thinner than the 13.8mm would suggest. The thin sliver of slab-sidedness on the left side contrasts well with the curves of the lugs. The left side, what they call the empty side, is one of my favorite views of this case. Having a thinner case, or just a thinner looking case, really does enhance the wearability of the Speedmaster. The new bracelet taper is a controversial feature, but for me, I like how aggressive the taper is. Just having a narrow bracelet near the clasp makes the watch easier to wear on the wrist, and it gives the illusion that the watch is overall a smaller watch. And I like the look of the new clasp also, that pinstripe pattern, and the clasp is very small and compact, but I could still do without the side pushers. I'd rather just open it up like a Rolex. And the last thing I'll mention is that the bezel diameter is not the same as the case diameter. So I measured the bezel diameter as 39mm. When you first glance at a watch with the bezel, the eyes fixate on the bezel, and having a smaller bezel gives the illusion that the watch is smaller, as opposed to the Submariner, where the bezel diameter is generally the same as the case diameter. Next, we'll do a comparison with the Rolex Skydweller, a watch that doesn't have the same design tricks as the Omega Speedmaster. So the same 42mm will look and feel substantially larger on the wrist. I'll be right back after the short film. Compare the Speedmaster with the Sky Dweller, also labeled as a 42mm diameter watch. But I would argue that the Rolex wears significantly larger than the Speedmaster. It has a beautiful blue dial, an annual calendar complication, and a sparkling white gold bezel, and a superb Super Jubilee bracelet. Although the bracelet has a similar aggressive taper to the Speedmaster, unlike the Speedmaster, it has a longer lug-to-lug length, a thicker case, and a heavier weight. All of these make the Sky Dweller look and feel larger on the wrist. Even though I measured the diameter as slightly less than 42mm, the lug-to-lug distance makes the watch take up almost all of my wristband. The heavy weight makes it feel top-heavy, and the thickness is not disguised by the flat sides of the Speedmaster. On the Sky Dweller, you can see the full thickness of the watch. The Sky Dweller is the superior watch. The spectacular blue dial, the automatic movement, annual calendar function, and the ingenious ring bezel command system. On top of that, the Jubilee bracelet is the best in the business. 5 links across, but impressively built, and a sturdy clasp with an easy link extension. But the heavy weight and large case size are the main drawbacks of the Sky Dweller. And it's a precious watch, and I really wouldn't want to damage it. I'm glad I brought this watch out again, and I enjoyed wearing it for the last couple of days. It just felt light on the wrist, and the bracelet wrapped around my wrist like a second skin, very similar to a Jubilee bracelet. It's relatively inexpensive in comparison to the Rolex world, and I didn't feel like I really needed to protect the watch or be extra careful with it. 2 months ago, I was on the verge of considering parting with this watch. Now I've taken a few steps back from that cliff, but giving it up is still not totally off the table. I took it for granted for a while, but then it managed to capture my attention again, so I'll see how it goes from here.